Welcome to Saving UX. I'm your host, Jeremy Kriegel. I believe UX is struggling. Look, there are more people doing the work than ever before, and every company says they're customer focused. So why does it feel so hard? And I don't mean the work. The work can be hard. That's okay. Why does it feel like we have to fight to do the things that will benefit the people we serve and the organizations we work with? I've been in this fight for more than 25 years, and I believe it's worth fighting for. UX, done well and applied to important problems, can change the world. Every week, I talk to UX veterans about the challenges facing our practice and what we can do to make it better. This week, I'm joined by Richard Banfield. Richard, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Jeremy. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too. So for folks who might not be familiar with your work, can you give us a little bit about your background, where you came up, and maybe some of the key experiences in your career?
Yeah, unlike some people, I decided to spend the first 10 years out of high school just really exploring what was on offer, and I did a lot of different things. Amongst those things, I also did a degree in biology. So I have a kind of scientific general approach to the work that I do. And when I started working seriously and got into what was then the early days of the internet, those experiences were definitely informed by my ideas around how we are living in a much more complex system than we might imagine, and all those complexities and the context to those complexities are really important. And I think maybe even before there was such a thing as user experience design, there was that consideration of like, how do we fit in and how do we make the things that we fit in part of that context. And then a series of funded startups, a few exits. Probably the bulk of my career was spent at a company called Fresh Till Soil, which I founded, and we recently sold in 2019 to a company called ADK. They've subsequently sold it to Project 202, and then I joined InVision for a few years, where I ran a small product group, and we essentially were the guys that created the learning platform and all the movies that came out of InVision, as well as the design maturity assessment. So, and the community, which was called the Design Leadership Forum, which is about 3,000 members. So I feel like I've had the opportunity to sit on both sides of the table. I've been both the service provider, the product maker, the guy who kind of helps to bring those cross-functional teams together in all the different guises that it can be put together. So I think that appeals to my generalist nature, which is, see a lot of things, see a lot of different perspectives, get as much context as possible, and then try and make something that's as useful and kind to the people that are using it as possible.
Love it. And given all those diverse roles, what is your perspective on where UX and design are as a practice now, maybe in relationship to what it's been in the past, things that maybe are better, not worse, things that we've improved on, the areas where we're still struggling? How do you see the world today?
So I'm an optimist. I generally see things as improving overall, and I see us getting better at the craft of what we do. That doesn't mean that there aren't hurdles along the way and challenges that we have to face. The really nice thing about being part of the InVision Design Maturity Assessment is that we were able to look at this from a data-driven point of view. We were able to actually see what maturity from a UX, UI, just a general design with a big D, what was happening. And we were able to do a massive amount of surveys. I think we eventually had about 10,000 responses to the various surveys that we sent out. 77 countries, about just shy of 3,000 different institutions or companies. So when I share what I'm about to share with you, it's through that lens. Like, I have my own personal opinions, and I'd love to, talk about those as well. But what we were able to see is that the industry of design, the industry of UX is maturing. And there are certainly a lot of different factors that go into that. But it's good news overall. If you're getting into UX now, if you're just maybe leaving school, or you maybe decided for a big career change and you're leaving one industry to get into this industry of ours, it's good. There are a lot more jobs than there've ever been. There's a lot more opportunity. There's a lot more understanding why this is important. Um, and overall, there's things to be excited about. So I agree with you. We do need to save UX from itself, but there is a generally a good thing out there, which is from a macro point of view, people are excited about what UX can do. The thing that we also noticed is that there's been a massive amount of specialization. So I think when you and I started, well over 2 decades ago, UX was just kind of a big blob of stuff. You just kind of helped people fix things and and made sense of things. And you touched a lot of the product. You touched, you worked with marketing, you worked with sales, you worked with product, you worked with engineering. You didn't have a choice. You really just had to work with all these people to make things happen. Over time, specialization has required a lot of these roles to disassociate from some of those other functions and become a little bit more siloed. It's natural. It happens in every industry, but it's not great. I don't really like what's happening. I see, and I'm gonna repeat what a professor once said to me, and that is, you can learn more and more about something until eventually you know everything about nothing. And I like to remind myself that because you can go down the rabbit hole of UX. You can really get into UX in a way that you start to forget that it's context specific and that it really requires a lot of cross-functional collaboration for it to have meaning and to really work. So the thing that I feel the data is telling us, and also my own experience, having managed a forum of 3,000 design leaders, is that the thing that we're grasping for is both the recognition that this is valuable. Yes, I mean, we want this to be valuable. We understand that we have a seat at the table now. But we're also realizing that we can be our own worst enemies, and that over specialization or over navel gazing on our own art or own craft can also be a hindrance to really making this something worthwhile. So I think those are the big kind of trends that I'm seeing, is that optimism overall, because UX is being accepted, it has a seat at the table, design is a seat at the table. There's really no argument for that. I mean, I've probably had well over 100 conversations with CDOs in the last couple of years. And there's no doubt that we have a seat at the table. But we have to keep that seat at the table, and we have to make sure that that's a meaningful conversation that's going to happen. And that's going to require us to be as cross-functional as possible. So we need to be present with our peers. We need to understand what their challenges are. We need to understand finance. We need to understand sales. We need to understand marketing. And I know there's a lot of experts out there who are like feeling like they want to be master of their particular craft, but this is what the data is telling us, and this is what the leaders are telling us, is that the more you reach out across the aisle, so to speak, the more you reach out across to your peers, the more likely you are to get the recognition you're looking for and preserve that seat at the table, as well as also making the craft a lot more relevant because it is contextual.
So many things I want to dig into there. Let me start with maybe the last one you said first. I've encountered a sentiment in the UX community which responds to that notion that we need to spend more time understanding business, understanding finance, by saying, well, wait a second. No one's telling the finance folks, you people really need to understand UX more, and the business folks, well, you need to really understand UX more. So why is it that we need to be the ones to reach out instead of the world of finance coming to us and saying, wow, you folks have something really valuable and you need to we really want to learn that?
Yeah, I mean, I find that argument pretty paper thin, because that's, if you apply that to all your relationships, you'd be in pretty deep water. I mean, if you're in a marriage, if you're in a partnership, if you're in, if you're a parent, and you just decided that you were going to wait for the other person to come across the aisle, I don't think
you'd be waiting a long
happen.
time. Yeah.
And we're still human
two people
beings.
with that approach don't get very far.
Right. Yeah. And human beings are, fundamentally complicated, especially when it comes to those social relationships, those interactions. And so I think it behooves us to step into this conversation actively and to be part of the conversation with intention. Yeah, sure. I don't see a lot of folks necessarily coming to UX, but that's because those roles are fairly well established. Finance has been around since the beginning of business, and sales has been around since the beginning of business, and marketing has been around for a very long time. So they have their comfort zones, and I don't know if they are properly incentivized to come to us yet. But there's always exceptions. I mean, working with design leaders, I was able to find out that they were able to start these conversations and then maintain very open conversations with their peers once it was established that there was value there. So if you understand that there is value, there should be, and you can communicate that clearly, then it shouldn't be a difficult conversation to start, and it shouldn't be a difficult conversation to continue with. So, yeah, I think the argument that, oh well, they're not doing it, so I'm not going to do it, is a fairly paper thin argument.
So I agree with you there, and thank you for that articulate deconstruction. That might lead nicely into the next one, because you did talk about that advocacy and education element, and you said that there's a seat at the table, but there's still not necessarily that recognition of value in terms of, correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, of the whole picture of what UX can provide or design can provide and how that works. So how do you square that there is the room has been made, we have that seat at the table, and yet there's still an education component or something about that we're still fighting for? Did I get that right? Did I understand your point correctly?
Yes, mostly. I think that we're the I'll give you a perspective, and then you can decide whether this is something that that correlates with the question, or whether we need to ask the question in a different way. The fact that we are at the table and we're having a conversation doesn't really mean much. Let me just start there. It means something in the sense that we're there, but it doesn't mean much in the sense that we are somehow like deserving of attention or deserving of anything, really. We have to earn that, just like any part of the business has to earn the right to be there. I've been on hundreds, if not thousands, of sales calls in my life. If you don't make the sale, you don't make the sale, right? It's binary. And your remuneration, your recognition, your reward is connected to that making the sale. I believe that anything else, design, anything really, any part of the business, should have the ability to understand what that binary relationship is with their customer. Are you really achieving your North Star metric? Are you achieving that particular goal that you set out as a team? If your UX role doesn't have some kind of measure against it, then that's a problem, right? It's difficult to do that. Now, it might be because your organization has chosen not to measure UX. That's a bigger problem. You might find yourself within a culture that doesn't care much for that kind of measurement. But if you are a design leader or a UX leader and you haven't taken the trouble to understand what your North Star metric is and what you need to align the work against, then you are failing yourself and your team and your organization. But you might even also be failing your customer, because your customer is probably not receiving the value that you're promising them. So if you back into this from the point of view of, well, this is a business, we're actually required to show up and do something of value, get exchange for that value, then what is it? What is it that you're trying to do? It might be the number of subscribers. It might be the manner in which they interact with the product. It might be some other more subtle metric. But there has to be something there. And you have to be able to bind the work and align the work to those things, even if they are evolving, even if they are changing over time.
So do you have any advice for maybe some leaders who are trying to figure out what their metrics should be and when they might think about pivoting to a different metric?
Yeah, two big conversations. So again, I think it depends on the organization. The organizations all, if you have decided, or the organization's decided that they're going to go the OKR route, or they've got something specific in mind, a framework in mind, north-south type framework, etc. Those kinds of things tend to be dominant. So if you find yourself as let's say a mid-tier manager or a mid-tier leader, and you're inheriting the organizational structure, then it's important that you understand that. So if OKRs are the way that you measure the business, then you really got to understand that, and you can't just assume that because uh, OKRs didn't have a parallel relationship with the work that you did as a UX person, that excludes you from understanding that. You should really understand what your organization is trying to measure, and you should really get into the details of that. If those things don't exist, then it also gives you the opportunity to show up and say, well, these are the things that could exist. Here are some of the frameworks that we could consider. I personally am not a huge fan of OKRs. I think they're a slightly more complicated version of what you need to do. But what I am concerned about is the number of metrics that people are trying to measure. They're trying to measure too many things. You get into a meeting, you go around the table, and it's this metric and that metric and this thing. And most of them don't really move the needle. Most of them are just vanity metrics so that some department can tell another department that they're actually doing something. And I think we all know that. We all know that there's a lot of bullshit metrics inside of UX, inside of business in general. And it's easy to say, oh, well, we did this thing and we were able to ship this many things or do this many things. Or if you go back, a few, maybe even like a decade or so ago, we were still counting the lines of code. And I mean, there were some stupid things like number of visitors to a website. It was just like really meaningless metrics. But there's still a little bit of that hangover. There's a bit of a hangover from those meaningless metrics. Everybody loves to say, oh, they've read John Doerr, and you got to measure what matters. You got to measure what matters, or something. I can't remember the name of the book, but
yeah, I think it's Measure What Matters.
Measure What Matters. It's one of those things where everybody's like, yeah, you got to get measurements, and then they get overly indexed on the measures. I think they got like 20 metrics. Pick one thing. Pick the thing that's going to be valuable for both the organization and for the customer, and double down on that. And I think that'll give leaders a lot more focus and a lot more ability to change what they need to do. Now, that doesn't mean you might have multiple inputs. You could have multiple inputs to that single metric that you're trying to deliver. But honestly, you can, I'm doing a lot of advisory work right now, and if I walk into a company and I see that they've got, an entire spreadsheet of metrics, it's an indication to me that they're actually not measuring anything, that those are just there because they read a book or a Medium post, or they heard somebody speaking at a conference about something, and now they're just all over that thing. And this is true of also the frameworks that deliver those metrics. So, I'll hear a design leader or a UX leader say, oh, we've decided to go like down this route with a particular framework. We only do jobs to be done. We basically don't do anything else. And we built our entire organization around that framework. Well, this kind of gets into the second part of your question, which is, where is this ultimately going to go, and how do we, understand what's next? Is I've been around long enough to see a lot of frameworks come and go, a lot. Not just frameworks for UX, but frameworks for everything, for technologies, for platforms. I came up early, so HTML and CSS were like brand new. They were super cool. Who the hell cares about that stuff anymore? It's like, it's like borderline in comparison to the stuff that's cool right now. And if you're thinking that your framework or your platform or your technology is the thing you're building your team around or your business around, again, you're measuring the wrong thing. It's really got very little to do with that. What ultimately matters is, does that framework give your team the ability to make good decisions? Because good decision making, good mental models are ultimately what drives the organization forward. Now, I don't mean to say that we should be entirely focused on velocity. It's not only about velocity, although velocity is a component of this. But I think that there's a huge element of team health and organizational health here, and product health, really. Like if you're If you're measuring too many things and you've got an overly complicated framework, or you can't get out of your way because the entire organization has decided to adopt safe agile, for example, then what you're doing to the organization is giving them a lot of headaches, a lot of friction to the work. And it becomes a lot of bullshit management, a lot of like admin and bureaucracy, where you're not doing the things you should do. Because what you really should be doing is talking to customers, talking to partners, talking to peers, understanding what the other cross-functional teams are doing. How are you going to bring value to the organization? Not, filling out long, ridiculous administrative versions, or like, charts or boards or whatever the latest SaaS organizational tool is. So many of those things are really just distractions from measuring or understanding what it is that you should be measuring or understanding. So
I want to underline
like,
that because I think there's so much, like the way you said before, is does it help you make better decisions? That, like, triple underline that. And I think you really hit it for me. It's definitely my confirmation bias. Or the goal is not delivering the report. The goal is that the data in that report is helping you make the better decisions for the benefit of the organization and the people you serve. But sometimes we get lost in the output, right?
yeah, and we saw this in the data. We saw this in the design maturity assessment. We saw this in the interviews that we were able to do with hundreds, if not thousands, of leaders. In that, really, the thing that drives an organization forward is this level of confidence that they have in their decision-making skills. So this is an extreme example. This would hopefully never happen. But let's say you were awoken at 2 a.m. to make a decision. You should have a framework that allows you to make good decisions relatively quickly without having to then call a big committee together or phone 10 leaders or wait for the next quarterly board meeting. There should be a way that says, is this thing aligned with our vision and our mission? Is this thing aligned with our values? Is this aligned with our OKR? Is this aligned with our North Star? There should be a very clear way to get to decision making. And so I feel, again, I'm using data from what we've seen from thousands of reports, but I'm also using a lot of my personal experience here. I feel like we're spending way too much time doing the things that don't matter instead of spending time understanding how to make good decisions. And that means we've got to get to know the people we're working with as well. We've got to explain to them how we make decisions. We've got to explain to them what these aligned frameworks look like. And that takes time. It takes time. You can't just expect to hire people, assemble a team, and for some reason, because they are all carrying the right title or came from good organizations, that doesn't mean that they're a team. It doesn't mean that they're aligned. It doesn't mean that they can make decisions together. So I think any framework which helps measure the right thing, and it's simple and easy to understand and gives you the confidence and the team health you need to make good decisions, that's the thing you should focus on. Not whether jobs to be done is the most fashionable thing or safe agile is the thing that your boss wants you to do. Those things, they can help, but they generally don't. They generally get in the way of good decision making. And what we saw from high performing teams is that they're good at making high quality choices, high quality decisions. Some of them don't even care about velocity. They're not like, oh, we're going to make 20 decisions, in the next minute. That's going to be our velocity. They're just like, we're going to make good decisions. We might even make the decision not to make the decision. One of the first decisions that I learned from one of our mutual product friends, Colin Kennedy, is he just said, look, the first decision I need to make is, do I need to make a decision? Do I really need to be sitting?
If the answer is no.
Yeah, exactly. Like, do we really need to be doing this thing? Do we really need to be discussing this feature? Do we really need to be making this change? Like, is this really going to help? And I think those are the kinds of things, the not to do's, the anti-to-do lists, whatever that kind of category of things is. Those are things that we need to learn to do as well. So good decision making, understanding who we're making decisions with, getting to know those people, getting to know how they make decisions, aligning those things. That's a really good use of time because that gets you where you want to go. And that's the art or the craft that we should be focused on, not, some other fashionable thing that's going to change anyway. I guarantee you, as as old and ugly enough as I am to have been around this long, I know that things will change, that frameworks will change. So that's the given.
One of my favorite phrases that kind of been kicking around the agile world, kind of along that decision making, is that notion of decide as late as responsible. So it's like, yeah, the first question, do we even need to decide? But if so, do we need to decide now?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's good we can wait till we have more information, not so long that we're locked into a decision, but when is the best time to make this decision? And this moment may not be it. Um, I want to follow up on your notion of decision framework. I imagine, with fresh tilled soil, you had control in that environment. It was your company. You founded that. What did your decision framework look like there? Maybe how did it change? And were there maybe instances where that decision framework collided with how your clients worked, and maybe how you were able to negotiate that? Because even if folks aren't in a consulting environment, there are frameworks that we might be able to control within our own practice.
Right.
But then we're going to collide when we work with others. So how do we negotiate those frameworks with our partners who we may not have that same kind of control over?
Yeah, that's a great question. So initially, we didn't really know what the hell we were doing, and so we went to a kind of a vision and values based decision making framework, which I think if you're in an early stage company and you haven't really figured out who you are or what you want to be when you grow up, those are good places to start. What are your, even if these are what I would call fuzzy vision and fuzzy values, they don't have to be completely nailed down yet, but if they are at least there as common bonds to align yourself to, they are a great starting point. And this is also true of not just businesses, but product as well. If you're a part of a new product group, let's say your team's just been assembled to build a product within a larger organization, you can at least refer to the vision and the values of the organization. And from that, you can distill what I would call, and I'm borrowing this term from my friend Martin Erickson, a decision stack. So your decision stack might literally be, are what we're doing aligned? Is it aligned with that vision? Is it aligned with our values? If it's not, should we even be doing it? So those are big, hairy questions that can be easily answered early on. And I don't know if this is a great example, but I remember reading when, this is probably going back 15 years now, Tesla had a vision statement that felt very, very big and very lofty for the organization, not just for each product, but a kind of company vision. And it was something along the lines of accelerating towards a sustainable future, something like that. And then I thought to myself, wow, what if I'm the product manager of a particular car or a fuel cell or a battery? That's not really that helpful, right? So then we started thinking about product vision versus company vision. And that became an interesting part of the decision stack, which is the vision tends to be something that comes from the top, maybe the founder or the CEO or even the legacy of the organization will have a vision and values that they are sending down from the top, if you will, if you believe that there's such a thing as a hierarchy. And then the product team needs to come together and distill what they think is a product vision. And I remember looking into this and seeing that each of the divisions within Tesla, each of those different products, they were widely varied, right? I mean, you had, municipal level battery packs and high-speed electric cars. And those two things were completely different. I mean, they require different skills, different engineering levels, and they had different products. And those different products meant different product visions. So one of the ways that you can figure out your decision stack, and I think we got there with Fresh Soil in ways, we allowed the projects, because we were an agency, these were projects, not just products. These were projects that were informing some of the way that we approach these things. And in fact, we allowed the project managers, okay, they would be called product managers in any other world, but they were project managers because we were essentially taking on client work and fulfilling their needs. We allowed them to drive the vision for those projects. So they would literally create the decision stacks for the project because then they had more context than we had. So if the executives were telling them what to do, we were lacking context. We were going to screw it up. So we allowed the teams to develop product level vision and the stack associated with that, the decision stack associated with that. And given that this is a podcast, we don't have a lot of time to go all into the meat of that. I write a lot on Medium, and there are a lot of articles specifically around this topic, around developing that product vision and how it might look different from the company vision, but using the company vision as an informant to the knowledge that you might then carry through your decision stack.
And awesome. You can send me those, and we'll put them in the show notes for folks.
And Martin Erickson, I want to make sure that he gets credit for this. He was the person who came up with this concept of, just like you have a tech stack, you need a decision stack for every team. And I can tell you that I've listened to that advice everywhere that I've gone, and it's been helpful. And I always start with that, like, who and how and why are the decisions made in this particular context? And then how can we stand up something to then either make that work better, like maybe it's already working and it just needs to be formalized, or essentially more memorialized in a way that everybody who's new can see it and understand it. Or if it doesn't exist, how can we take the behavior that's working and turn that into something that looks like a decision stack, so that, getting back to my silly example of waking up somebody at 2 a.m. and saying, hey, we need to ship this XYZ thing, they should be able to scratch their head for 5 minutes and say, yep, it aligns with these things. It's almost like a decision tree in a way. And then go back to like, okay, cool, we should ship that. Or no, it broke halfway down and it's not in line with, say, this quarter's OKR. We could do it. We just have to bounce it out to the next quarter, for example. And really what this ultimately does is allow for throughput to happen, because, most organizations suffer from some kind of organizational constipation, where they're putting too many things in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Too many decisions are getting made because there isn't a decision stack. So too many things are getting dumped into the hopper. And then what's happening is those things are not getting produced or created or shipped. And so you look at the end of that pipeline and you say, well, we're not shipping anything. Well, the problem isn't the pipeline, it's what's getting into the pipeline. And decision stacks are really, really good at reducing the intake. Like if you're stuffed after a big meal, you don't go and eat more food, right? This is what we're doing in organizations. We're stuffed, and then we're saying, you know what we should do? We should order another 5 courses. So decision stacks are really there just to kind of reduce the input, so that we don't lead to organizational constipation.
And that kind of goes back to your comment around metrics, around finding the fewer number of metrics that's going to give you focus, as opposed to trying to digest the universe of possibilities. It sounds like this is tying into that focus. Concept.
I mean, again, one of our mutual friends, John Cutler, has published this idea of a North Star metric, and I like the simplicity of it. I had not called it a North Star metric, although I borrowed that same idea from the guy who started Keller Williams. I don't know if you've ever read this book. It's called The One Thing. I can't remember his first name. Maybe it's Stephen Keller or something like that. But he had written a book called The One Thing. And he had built the biggest real estate business in the world on this concept of, you really should only be doing one thing at a time. You should have one metric. You should have one project, one initiative, because that's how human beings get stuff done. We're not really good at multitasking. We're not really good at doing a multiple of things.
But we think we are.
We think we are. Yeah, we love to believe that we're so good and we're so amazing.
We're the exception. Everyone else is bad at it, but we're really good at it.
So I think what I learned from that book, The One Thing, and which John then made much more contextually relevant to product, was that you've got to focus on that one North Star metric, that thing that allows everybody to point at and say, are we moving that particular metric? Like, we might have multiple inputs, but are those inputs aligned with moving that metric? Because if we're not, then this probably isn't something that worthwhile doing, and we probably shouldn't be doing it in the first place.
So how can, if these things aren't in place, or if the right ones aren't in place, how can UX folks, designers, how can we be part of the conversation that is going to help put these frameworks in place to help the organization as a whole? Because this isn't just a design problem. This is an organizational problem. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Um, so again, it depends on the organization, and I'll my disclaimer to all of this is that one of the choices you may need to make is to leave the organization you're in. So I'll put that at the beginning of the conversation, not at the end. You may find that after giving this a lot of thought and thinking about how this might be implemented or changed within your organization, that there's no way that that can happen, and that you actually need to go somewhere that's healthier for you, healthier for the organization. So I'll put that as a disclaimer in the front of this. Um, I think that fundamentally human beings do want to do the right thing. Nobody goes to work and thinks I'm going to do a shit job. Nobody goes to work and thinks I'm going to be malicious and screw everybody else. Hopefully, I haven't run into too many malicious people in my lifetime, even though there's like, there will be, the odd outlier. I think people show up at work and they want work to work. I think they like the idea that they can be part of that. And so that's a really good assumption to take into a conversation, is that people are fundamentally looking to improve things and are very open to conversations about this. The way that I have had a lot of luck, both in my organizations, but also coaching large organizations like Amex and Bank of America. And so, because I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, Richard's just run a small, agency, and even Envision wasn't that big. I think we had like 900 people. I work at some organization. We have 50,000 employees. That'll never work. Well, yeah, you're probably right. It's not going to change overnight, but you could make a change over a period of months or years, and you could influence your team, or at least the context that you're in. And the way to start with that is to first ask the question, how are we using our time? One of the universal things we all share is that we all have exactly the same amount of time. It doesn't matter whether you're Warren Buffett or the President of the United States, you have the same amount of time that everybody else has. And money or power or influence can't change that. So I always start the conversation with time. And the way to workshop this, if you can, if you're a leader, is to have everybody bring their calendars to a conversation. So you set up a time, you all bring your calendars, and you look at how you are treating each other, because that's what time is. Time is like how we are. It's a great quote. I'm going to butcher it, but it's something along the lines of, we don't have time, we are time. So it's pretty philosophical, but if you think about it, is we are a series of UX, right? We're a series of experiences. We're a series of moments. Those are the things that make us human beings. Those are the things that make us sentient and conscious. And so if you start the conversation with how are we using our time in that kind of sense, like how are we showing up with our time? How do we respect each other's time? You generally have a couple of things that happen. One thing that does happen is you get a lot of tears. A lot of people are like generally just sad with the way the time is spent. And they look at how many meetings are on their calendar and they go, wow, we're spending a lot of time in meetings. So how to change people's way that they are focused on the right things is to really start the conversation with that. What are we doing in these meetings? Why are we interacting this way? How much time are we wasting or using that could be spent doing other things? If you're a leader, a very powerful thing to do is cancel as many of the meetings as you can. Preserve the really important ones. Maybe those are the one-on-ones, and reduce the amount of people in meetings. Just say, well, looks like these 10 people are getting together every week. Why? Is there another way we can do that? Could we replace that with a decision stack? What decisions are being made? Oh, this is informative. Is there a way to share those reports, those things in a way that doesn't require a 2-hour meeting with 10 people? Because 10 people, 2 hours, let's say they're, you could quantify their hourly rate at like $100 an hour. Suddenly you've got a lot of expense. These are expensive meetings. Actually, Amazon used to make a really cool thing, which you can't use anymore because we don't have a lot of in-person meetings, but it was called time in meetings. And it was a little clock, and you would put in the number of people in the meeting, and then you would set the start button, and it would just calculate in real time with this nice big screen how much money you were wasting. And we got those, when we were in the watch factory in Waltham, we got a couple of those for our boardrooms. And people would be like, "Oh shit, we just wasted like $6,000 in this meeting," and it very quickly became a way for us to ask the question: should we be having these meetings? So that's a really, really good place to start. And then ask the questions. Well, then what would we either do with that time? Would we replace it with other meetings? Probably not the best idea ever. But could you give people space to do deep work? Could this be the work that they really need to be doing? Or even better, could we just let them go home? Like, for instance, if you do the one thing, if you are doing one thing per day and you're focused on that, what if you finished at 2 p.m.? Just go home, right? Stop working. You've done your one thing. You committed to that. That was what you agreed to do. And now you go and rest. Wouldn't that lead to better team health? Yes, it would. Wouldn't that lead to more like time doing the things that you really need to do, like reading and thinking and just sitting, staring into space, letting your brain take in all of the things it's had exposure to during the day? Because I don't know about you, I'm a voracious reader, and I want to read. I want to learn. I want to get excited. I see, behind you, you've got the pretend bookcase. I hope that in real life, that there are actually books in your life and that
Tons.
you're constantly learning.
Although mostly audiobooks these days.
Yeah. So when are you going to have the time to do that if you're working and, potentially also commuting, and then you've also got a family or you've got other things to consider? We're just not spending enough time delving into the things that are really important and spending enough time doing the things that are going to make us smarter and wiser and more interesting as human beings.
Right. I don't know if it was Covey or someone else had the phrase sharpening the saw. Like, you've got to spend time improving, getting better, so that when you are working, you're more effective. I also want to say
there's no correlation between amount of time at work and success either. I like working hard. Like most people, I enjoy work, like when it's good, right? When it's creative and it's possible to do that. But I don't like wasting time. I don't think anybody likes sitting in a long meeting. Nobody likes coming to the end of the day and going, that was a shit day. I did nothing. I regret nothing. There was nothing productive about it. So how can we change that? If we're leaders, how can we change that dialogue and that narrative within our time use and our if you think about time as a resource, but really just as like respect for other human beings?
I think I recall, and again, I know this is based around time, but I think it was Jeff Sutherland, who's one of the Scrum founders, talked about, they did a study at their agency and they found that productivity started diminishing after around 37, 36 hours. Like, it was less than 40 hours. So like the hardcore burning the candle, let's put in the 50, 60 hour, it led to, they got less done when they put in more hours than when they put in less. And I thought that was 100%. Fascinating, but yet that doesn't seem to be adopted widely.
No, I mean, if you ask anybody who's at Freshfield Soil, our average week was about 32 hours. And we were, at one point, Freshfield Soil had the highest revenue per employee in the industry. It just was, we were just doing better work with the time that we had.
That wraps up part 1 of my conversation with Richard Banfield. Tune in next week when you'll hear Richard say,
I am Superman. You are Superman.
Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that or any future episodes. You can also follow me on Twitter @Sonark or on LinkedIn. I post show updates to both platforms. Go to sux.live for more info as well as past episodes. That's SUX for savingux.live. Until next time, I'm Jeremy Kriegel, and this has been Saving UX.